A billionaire wakes whispering the name of a woman he's never met. A billionaire collapses on a cold Chicago street, ignored by the crowd, until a poor street vendor kneels beside him, whispering a desperate prayer that sparks the miracle no one can explain. That single moment ties their lives together, unleashing secrets, danger, and a twist that will change everything. Rain had turned the old bus stop on 63rd Street into a slick sheet of trembling reflections, neon signs bending, headlights stretching long across puddles, the whole world shivering in South Chicago's cold. Harper Lane pushed her fruit cart up against the shelter's wall, trying to shield it from the wind. The wheels rattled the same way they always did, wobbling like they were tired of holding her life together. She pulled her hood tight, breath clouding the air, and wiped moisture off the oranges she hoped to sell before midnight. Most nights were predictable, quiet, heavy, familiar in the kind of way that made hope feel like a visitor who stopped by but never stayed long. Tonight was different. She felt it before she saw it. An energy, a tremor that didn't belong. A man in a charcoal gray suit, too sharp, too clean, too expensive for this part of the city, stumbled out from the shadows near the crosswalk. At first, Harper thought he was drunk, or maybe lost. His steps faltered, his breath hitched. Then he dropped, hard, his body hitting the wet concrete with a dull, final sound that made even the rain seem to pause. People turned. People stared. No one moved. A teenager muttered, "Nah, don't touch that. Look at his watch. Dude's loaded. You help him, that's trouble." A woman tugged her kid behind her. "Call someone. Don't get close." Harper's chest tightened the way it always did when fear spread faster than compassion. She knew that feeling, being judged before being seen, blamed before being asked. A black girl in a worn coat, standing over a wealthy white man? That could go wrong 100 ways, but the man wasn't breathing. That truth cut through every warning. Harper stepped forward. "Girl, don't do it," someone whispered behind her. "They'll say it was you." The words hit her like cold rain, but her feet didn't stop. She knelt beside him, knees soaking instantly, palms trembling as she touched his wrist. The skin was icy, the pulse absent. "No, no," she whispered, leaning closer, listening for any breath, any sign of life. There was nothing. The world around her blurred, the bus stop, the staring strangers, the passing traffic. Only the man remained, pale under the streetlights, his chest still, his face slack as though life had slipped out without permission. Fear crawled up Harper's spine. Not fear of him. Fear of losing him. Fear of doing nothing. Fear of letting someone die when she could have tried. She remembered her mother's voice, soft and warm even on the hardest nights. "If God puts a life in your hands, baby, don't ever let fear decide for you." Harper pressed her palm gently over the man's sternum. The rain tapped against her back, cold and insistent. Her breath shook. Her lips moved before she even realized she was speaking. "Lord, if he can hear me, give him back. Please." Someone stepped closer, phone in hand. "Ambulance is on the way. Just wait." Wait? She looked at the man's chest, still like a stone. Waiting was a luxury he didn't have. Her heart pounded hard enough to hurt. She bent lower, forehead nearly touching his, and whispered with all the trembling faith she had left, "Don't leave yet. Not here. Not like this." The wind gusted, lifting her hood. A horn blared somewhere in the distance. Rain stung her cheeks, and still, no movement, no breath, no pulse. Harper swallowed, steadying her hands as sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer but not close enough. She leaned in. She prayed again, and as her fingers hovered over his chest, hesitating, choosing courage over fear, The world seemed to hold its breath with her. Would he return to life? Or had she reached him too late? The ambulance lights turned the street red as they rounded the corner, racing toward them. Harper closed her eyes and whispered one last desperate plea, hoping the night was listening. For a breathless second, the world felt suspended, sirens echoing off brick walls, rain streaking down her face, the man's body still cold beneath her hands. She could taste fear in the back of her throat, that metallic panic she'd known too well growing up in a neighborhood where help always seemed to arrive too late. But something inside her, something stubborn, something gentle, pushed through the terror. She opened her eyes. No pulse. No breath. Okay. Stay with me, she murmured, forcing her shaking hands into position. She laced her fingers, planted her palms against his chest, and pushed. The first compression felt like pressing against a stone. The second made her arms tremble. By the third, she could hear people muttering behind her. Why is she touching him? She's gonna get blamed for this. Girl's crazy. Let the medics handle it. Harper tried to block them out. Rain poured harder, as if the clouds themselves were frightened. Her knees slipped on the wet concrete, but she steadied herself and kept going. Come on. Breathe. Breathe, she whispered, her voice breaking. Nothing. The ambulance was seconds away, but she knew seconds mattered more than anyone standing around understood. She'd seen too many folks in her neighborhood wait for help that never came. She couldn't stand by. She couldn't watch another life vanish in front of her. Please, she whispered again, softer this time, more prayer than command. On instinct, maybe desperation, she bent forward, lowered her forehead to his, and pressed a trembling kiss just above his brow. A blessing. A farewell. A plea. She didn't know what it was meant to be, only that her heart told her to give something human in this inhuman moment. Stay, she whispered against his skin. Don't go yet. The ambulance screeched to a stop. The paramedics rushed out, boots splashing water over the pavement. Ma'am, step back! Let us take it from here, move! Strong arms pulled her away as they slid the man onto a stretcher. Harper stumbled back, breath heaving, her palms burning from the compressions, knees soaked and aching. She watched in helpless silence as the paramedics hooked up monitors and oxygen lines, their movements sharp and efficient. Then a sound cut through everything, the irregular, jagged beep of the heart monitor. Flat. A pause. Another flat. Then, a spike. Beep, beep, beep. The paramedics froze mid-motion. What the? One murmured. He's coming back. Did he have any pulse before? No, nothing. They glanced toward Harper, confusion flickering across their faces, but she only wrapped her arms around herself, as if afraid her heart might fall out of her chest. While they lifted him into the ambulance, a black SUV parked half a block away sat with its headlights dimmed. A man in a dark coat leaned forward behind the wheel, eyes narrow as he watched every second unfold. Harper didn't see him, but the faint glow of a dashboard screen lit a stern, unreadable expression. The back doors slammed shut. The ambulance pulled away, sirens flaring anew. The red and blue lights washed briefly over Harper's face before disappearing into the night. Silence settled over the bus stop. Someone finally spoke. Well, that was something. Another muttered, Hope she doesn't get in trouble. A woman whispered, Did you see that? The man came back right after she touched him. Harper didn't respond. She stood there, soaked through, trembling from cold and fear. Fear not just of what had happened, but what might come next. A wealthy man collapsing in a poor neighborhood never led to simple outcomes. Her fruit cart squeaked as she pushed it toward the sidewalk, the wheels catching on cracks in the pavement. She wanted to go home. She wanted to disappear. But something in her chest, a small ache, a strange heaviness, lingered. She kept seeing his face. Pale. Still. Empty. And then, for the briefest heartbeat, she'd felt something shift beneath her palms. A warmth. A flicker. She didn't know whether she had imagined it. The rain eased as she turned onto her block, the sky bruised with storm clouds drifting away. Apartment lights glowed faintly through broken blinds. Somewhere a train rumbled past, shaking the rusted fences. South Chicago carried on like nothing had happened. Harper stopped beneath the flickering street lamp outside her building, gripping the cart's handle to steady her breath. "You did what you could," she whispered to herself, though she wasn't sure the words comforted her at all. Inside her jacket pocket, her fingers were still trembling, still remembering the cold skin of a stranger and the terrifying stillness of a chest that refused to rise. She closed her eyes and whispered one last prayer, not knowing why it felt necessary. "Please let him live, wherever they took him." Across the city, deep inside a hospital lit by white fluorescent light, monitors continued their steady beeping beside an unconscious man whose life had returned by a margin too thin to understand. And in the black SUV parked briefly outside the emergency bay, the man in the dark coat lifted his phone and muttered, "I found her." Then he drove off into the night, leaving behind a trail of questions Harper didn't yet know existed. By the time Harper reached the narrow stairwell of her apartment building, the adrenaline had drained from her body, leaving her legs heavy and her breaths uneven. The old brick structure groaned with every gust of wind. Pipes rattled. A hallway light flickered like it couldn't decide whether to stay alive or give up. South Chicago buildings didn't age gracefully. They aged honestly. Harper pushed open the door to their unit, a studio with peeling paint the color of old butter, and a heater that coughed more than it warmed. A soft voice rose from the bed in the corner. "Harper? That you, baby?" Her grandmother, Miss Laverne, sat propped against two pillows, a knit shawl around her shoulders. Her hair, silver and tightly curled, framed a face lined by years of worry and tenderness. "Yeah, Grandma. It's me," Harper answered, forcing a smile. Miss Laverne's eyes narrowed. "You're soaked through and shaking. What happened?" "Just the rain," Harper murmured, setting her fruit cart's small earnings on the table. She didn't want to speak the truth. Not until her own heart had settled. Not until she understood how she felt about witnessing life slip and return right beneath her hands. But Miss Laverne had raised her since she was 6. The older woman's gaze was too sharp, too loving, to miss anything real. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Not a ghost," Harper whispered. "A man." Miss Laverne patted the blanket beside her. "Come sit." Harper walked over, shoes squeaking on the worn linoleum. She sank onto the edge of the bed as her grandmother reached for her hand. Warm, soft, grounding. "Tell me, baby." Harper took a slow breath. "A man collapsed at the bus stop. Well-dressed, like he had no business being in our neighborhood. Nobody wanted to touch him. They were scared. And I—" Her voice wavered. "Grandma, he wasn't breathing." Miss Laverne bowed her head. "Lord have mercy." "I tried CPR," Harper said, staring at her trembling hands. "I don't even know if I did it right. But then the ambulance came, and something happened. The monitor, his heart, came back." She looked up, eyes glassy. "He lived, Grandma. I think he lived." For a moment, Miss Laverne simply squeezed her hand, pride shining gently through the sadness in her eyes. "Harper Lane, you've been saving people your whole life. You don't need training for a heart like yours." "But what if they think I caused it?" Harper whispered. "A black girl touching a rich man who falls dead in the street? Folks don't wait for truth around here. They just choose what story fits their fear. Miss Laverne didn't deny it. Reality had shaped both their lives in ways Harlem novels and Chicago headlines had long ago stopped counting. Instead, she brushed a thumb across Harper's knuckles. You did right. And right don't always feel safe, but it don't stop being right. Harper rested her head briefly against her grandmother's shoulder. The scent of peppermint tea and lavender brought a quiet steadiness she hadn't realized she needed. Later, after Miss Laverne drifted into sleep, Harper sat at their small table, her jacket draped over the chair, her fingers still numb. The city hummed outside, a restless lullaby of passing cars, distant sirens, voices echoing off alley walls. She stared at her cart, the fruit speckled with raindrops like tiny beads of glass. She should have felt proud. She should have felt brave. Instead, she felt exposed. As if helping someone had put a spotlight on her life, one she never asked for and definitely didn't want. She stood to close the curtain when a notification from her cracked phone lit up the room. The screen showed a news banner from a local station. Unidentified man collapses in South Chicago. Condition critical. Harper's pulse spiked. She clicked the notification. A blurry photo taken by a bystander showed paramedics carrying the man into the ambulance. His face was partially obscured, but the caption chilled her. Sources believe he may be a high-profile corporate figure. No further details released. Harper stepped back, heart pounding again. She whispered to the empty room. What kind of man was he? No answer came. Only the wind outside her window, brushing against the old building like it wanted to warn her. She didn't know that across town, in a private hospital suite, machines were keeping the man alive while doctors whispered in confusion about the sudden return of his heartbeat. She didn't know that someone had already found footage of her leaning over him, hands on his chest, lips pressed to his forehead. She didn't know that her face, blurred, shadowed, but distinct, was now frozen on a security monitor under hospital lights. And she didn't know that the man who had whispered, "I found her," wasn't finished tracking down the girl whose kindness had interrupted the plans of powerful people. Harper only knew one thing. Tonight, she had stepped forward when everyone else stepped back. And tomorrow, the world might come knocking because of it. She turned off the light, crawled under the blanket beside her grandmother, and closed her eyes. But sleep didn't come easily. Somewhere deep inside her, something was shifting. A quiet ache, a strange anticipation, as if fate had tugged a thread she hadn't realized was connected to her life. Outside, a car rolled slowly down her street. Headlights dimmed. It paused near her building before easing away into the night. Harper slept through it. But the questions following her had only just begun. Across the city, far from the cracked windows and dim hallways of South Chicago, a different kind of silence filled the VIP wing of Lakeshore Medical Center. It was the kind of silence money could buy. Polished floors, soft lighting, quiet machines humming with steady purpose. Outside room 814, two security guards stood watch, their suits pressed, their expressions carved from stone. Inside, Elliot Ward lay beneath a thin hospital blanket, pale against the sterile white sheets. His chest rose and fell unevenly, as if his body was unsure whether it wanted to stay tethered to this world. Electrodes dotted his skin, monitors tracing every fragile beat. Doctors had stabilized him, but no one could explain why his heart had returned in a sudden jolt the moment the ambulance arrived. For hours he drifted between darkness and murky dreams, the kind that felt half-remembered and half-made of longing. Voices drifted through the haze, cold air, rain. A woman's breath trembling as she whispered something warm against the storm. Then, as dawn crept over the lakefront skyline, a monitor beeped sharply. Elliot's fingers twitched. A nurse nearly spilled her coffee. "Doctor, he's responding!" Dr. Patel rushed in, flipping on a brighter light. The movement roused Elliot enough for his eyelids to flutter. He inhaled, slow and rough, as though drawing air back from the edge of some distant place. "Mr. Ward, can you hear me?" the doctor said, leaning close. Elliot blinked again. The ceiling sharpened. The antiseptic smell stung. His throat felt raw. "Where?" His voice cracked, thin and broken. "You're at Lakeshore Medical Center," Dr. Patel answered gently. "You collapsed last night." A faint frown crossed Elliot's forehead. He tried to lift his hand, but stopped when wires tugged at his skin. "Easy," the nurse said softly. "Just breathe." But Elliot wasn't listening anymore. Something else clawed at the back of his mind, like a voice he couldn't quite grab, a moment suspended on the edge of memory. A whisper, a touch, a prayer. "Where is she?" he murmured. Dr. Patel exchanged a confused glance with the nurse. "Who, Mr. Ward?" "The woman," he whispered. "She was there. She said—" His breath hitched. He tried again. "She prayed for me." The nurse cleared her throat. "You were unconscious when paramedics arrived. No one reported—" "No," Elliot insisted weakly, shaking his head against the pillow. "There was a woman. She touched my forehead. She told me not to leave." His voice softened. "She sounded scared and kind." Dr. Patel jotted something onto the chart, but there was doubt in his eyes. Sometimes the mind creates sensations while unconscious. Dreams can feel very real. Elliot's gaze hardened, even in his weakened state. It wasn't a dream. A soft knock interrupted them. The door eased open, and a tall man in a sharp navy coat stepped inside. Damien Ward, Elliot's younger cousin. He moved like someone used to commanding attention, his smile polite but tight at the corners. "Well, look who decided to rejoin us," Damien said with a smoothness that didn't match the tension in his eyes. "You gave everyone a scare." Elliot studied him for a moment, something guarded flickering behind his exhaustion. "How long was I out?" "Long enough for shareholders to start biting their nails," Damien replied lightly. "But don't worry. I handled everything." Handled everything. Even in his haze, the phrase felt heavy. Dr. Patel excused himself, but not before whispering to the nurse, "Run another set of scans." When the door shut, Damien sat in the visitor's chair, leaning back with an air of effortless entitlement. "Do you remember anything? What happened?" Elliot hesitated. His mind flashed back to rain hitting pavement, cold skin, a voice pleading, breath returning. Life snapping back like a frayed wire pulled taut. "There was a woman," Elliot said slowly. "She tried to save me." Damien's fingers drummed once against the chair's arm. "A woman?" "Yes. She was holding my head. I could feel her trembling." Elliot searched the room as though expecting her to step through the door. "She prayed for me." Damien's jaw flexed almost imperceptibly. "No one told the hospital staff about any woman." "She was there," Elliot said with certainty that surprised even him. "Find her." Damien stood abruptly, smoothing his coat. "You're in no condition to fixate on strangers." "I'm not asking," Elliot replied, voice low but firm despite the dryness in his throat. "Find her." For a moment, Damien's eyes cooled into something unreadable. Then the polite smile returned. "I'll look into it." He left, footsteps sharp against the polished floor. But Damien had no intention of looking into it, because Damien already knew exactly who she was. Hours earlier, he had reviewed the security footage, grainy but clear enough to see Harper kneeling beside Elliot's body, hands working, lips moving in a whisper. He had watched the ambulance monitor spike. He had listened to the paramedic report describing the impossible return of Elliot's heartbeat. And Damien didn't like coincidences. A billionaire unexpectedly collapses. His cousin, the only obstacle to Damien's rise in the company, miraculously survives. A nameless black girl appears from nowhere, and the first words Elliot speaks upon waking involve her. No, he didn't like coincidences at all. Meanwhile, back in South Chicago, Harper wheeled her cart toward the bus stop for another long day. The sky was still gray, the air still cold, but something inside her felt even heavier. She kept glancing over her shoulder, as though a shadow might detach itself from the alley walls. When she reached her usual corner, a regular customer approached, a man who worked nights at the auto shop down the block. "You hear the news?" he asked, handing her a few dollars for a banana. "What news?" "Guy who collapsed last night? Folks online think he's some big-shot tech billionaire. Elliot Ward or something. You know how people talk." Harper froze. The name felt unreal, too big to fit beside the memory she carried. A pale face on wet pavement, expensive shoes soaked with rainwater, a man whose life had slipped between her fingers. "He's alive?" she asked. The man shrugged. "Rumor says he is. Who knows with rich people? They don't tell us nothing." Harper nodded, but her hands were unsteady as she placed the banana into a bag. She had saved a billionaire, or tried to. Her breath caught at the thought. People like Elliot Ward lived in skyscrapers with glass walls and private security. People like her carried fruit carts with wobbly wheels and prayed rent didn't go up. Their worlds were not circles that touched, but something inside her whispered that they already had. Back at the hospital, Elliot stared out the window as rain began again, streaking down the glass. His chest still ached, but another feeling grew beside the pain, an inexplicable pull toward the woman whose voice had brought him back from the dark. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her face, but he knew one thing with absolute clarity. He had to find her. Because she hadn't saved his life for reward or recognition. She saved him because it was who she was. And somewhere far from his sterile hospital room, that same woman was pushing her cart through the rain, unaware that the man she saved had already begun searching for her. Unaware that fate had nudged both their lives onto a path neither could turn away from the now. Harper adjusted her hood, trying to hide her face from the wind. She had no idea her name was already on the lips of a billionaire, and in the crosshairs of his cousin. The morning dragged itself across South Chicago, with a dull grayness that seeped into every corner of the neighborhood. Clouds hung low like they were tired of holding themselves up. The streets still glistened from last night's rain, puddles catching the weak reflection of passing cars. Harper set out her fruit on the cart, bananas lined neatly, apples polished as much as they could shine. Oranges stacked into a small pyramid she tried to make look hopeful. She needed hopeful today. Every time a stranger walked past, her shoulders stiffened. Every siren made her flinch. She kept replaying the moment the man collapsed, how cold his skin felt, how terrifying that stillness had been. She kept wondering if he was alive, if he'd wake up, if he remembered anything. Her voice, her trembling hands, the prayer she whispered because she had nothing else to offer. By noon, her chest felt tight, like someone had pressed a stone into her ribs. That was when a black sedan slowed near her stand. Her grip tightened on the edge of the cart. The window rolled down. A man leaned out, dark-skinned, well-dressed, with steady eyes that didn't feel threatening, only purposeful. He held a photo on his phone. The screen turned just enough for Harper to see her silhouette kneeling beside the man she'd tried to save. "Harper Lane?" he asked. Her breath froze. "Who's asking?" "My name is Sola Jennings," he said gently. "I'm with Wardtech." She blinked. "Wardtech? As in..." Elliot Ward, Sola finished quietly. Yes, he's alive. And he wants to meet the woman who tried to save him. Harper's heart thudded painfully, relief blending with fear. I didn't save him. I just... You were there when no one else stepped forward, Sola said. Sometimes that's more than enough. Harper shook her head. No, you don't understand. I didn't do anything special. I just reacted. And that reaction may have made the difference, Sola replied. Mr. Ward is asking for you specifically. A couple of neighbors lingered nearby, pretending to inspect Harper's fruit while listening with raised brows. Whispers drifted through the air. That's her? I told y'all something was up. She touched that rich man. She better be careful. Harper felt her skin burn. She lowered her voice. Look, I'm not trying to get involved in something big. I helped because no one else would. That's all. I understand, Sola said with sincerity she didn't expect. But Mr. Ward deserves to thank you himself. And, truthfully, he needs some answers too. He woke up asking about you. A cold rush went through her. He remembers me? Not everything, just pieces. Enough to know your presence meant something. Harper stared down at the apples in her hands, unsure what to feel. Gratitude? Fear? Guilt for wanting to know how he was doing? All she knew was this. Stepping into the world of a billionaire felt dangerous. People like Elliot Ward lived behind tinted windows and locked gates. People like her lived paycheck to paycheck, praying the landlord didn't raise rent again. What if it's a mistake? She whispered. Then we clear it up, Sola replied. But if it's not, if you helped him survive, don't you want to know? Harper swallowed hard. She thought of her grandmother's words from last night. You don't run from a truth that came from kindness. After a long moment, Harper nodded. Let me call my grandma. Then I'll come. Sola offered a small, reassuring smile. I'll wait right here. Harper stepped aside and dialed home. The moment Miss Laverne heard what happened, her voice softened with a mix of awe and worry. Baby, you go. That man saw your heart in his darkest moment. That's not something you ignore. But be careful. Not everyone likes seeing a black girl in a place they didn't expect her to be. I know, Grandma, Harper whispered. Keep your head high, and don't let nobody make you feel smaller than the love you gave. Harper blinked tears away. I'll be back as soon as I can. When she hung up, Sola opened the car door for her. It'll be okay. She wasn't convinced, but she got in anyway. The sedan rolled away from the cracked sidewalks and graffiti-tagged underpasses of her world, heading toward glass towers and clean streets where security cameras watched every inch. Harper pressed her hands between her knees, trying to steady her breath as the city transformed around them. The closer they got to Lakeshore Medical Center, the shinier everything became. Coffee shops with glowing menus, spotless bus stops, pedestrians dressed like they had places worth being. It felt like crossing into a different country. You don't have to be nervous, Sola said gently. Mr. Ward isn't like most men in his position. Harper gave him a sideways glance. Even good men can forget how people like me get treated. Sola didn't deny it. You're right, but Elliot Ward remembers the difference between power and decency. At least, he used to. Maybe you reminded him of that. She looked out the window again, unsure how to respond. When they pulled up to the hospital's private entrance, Harper's heartbeat tripled. Two guards eyed her skeptically as they opened the doors, but once Sola flashed his ID, they stepped aside. Inside, the hospital gleamed, marble floors, soft lighting, and the faint scent of lemon sanitizer. Nurses moved in quiet efficiency, colorful scrubs brushing past the sterile white walls. Harper felt painfully out of place. A receptionist glanced at her hoodie and worn jeans before shifting her eyes to Sola. "She's with you?" she asked, tone clipped. "Yes," Sola replied firmly. The receptionist hesitated, then nodded toward the elevators. "Room 814. They're expecting you." Expecting her. The doors closed behind them with a soft hiss. Harper watched the numbers climb. Each floor felt like stepping deeper into a world she was never meant to touch. When they reached the VIP level, the elevator opened to a quiet hallway lined with framed modern art. A soft beep echoed from a room at the end of the corridor. Sola paused just outside the door. "Harper," he said gently. "He's awake. Weak, but awake. Don't worry about what to say. Just be yourself." Be herself. She wasn't sure that would be enough for a man whose world was built on millions. But she nodded anyway. Sola pushed open the door, and Harper stepped into the room where Elliot Ward, billionaire, CEO, stranger, whose life she'd held in her trembling hands, waited. Not knowing that another man, Damian Ward, was already moving to ensure she never stayed in that picture for long. The room was brighter than she expected, sun sliding through half-open blinds, painting warm stripes across the floor. Machines hummed in a steady rhythm. A vase of fresh hydrangeas sat by the window, a quiet contrast to the cold rain she'd walked through last night. Everything felt ordered, expensive, gentle in ways her world rarely was. Elliot Ward lay propped against crisp pillows, the thin hospital blanket pulled to his waist. His face still looked pale, more fragile than the polished photos she'd seen online in trade magazines at corner stores. But his eyes, clear, sharp, and startlingly human, lifted the moment she entered. "Is that her?" he whispered. Sola nodded once. "This is Harper Lane." For a heartbeat, the world shrank to the space between them. Elliot studied her like he was trying to recognize a memory just out of reach. Harper shifted her weight, suddenly aware of her worn hoodie, rain-frizzed curls, and hands that still carried faint bruises from pressing against his chest. She opened her mouth, closed it again, then finally managed, "Hi." His lips curved into something soft, almost a smile, but far more vulnerable. "You were there," he said. "I remember. Your voice." Her cheeks warmed. "I didn't know what else to do. You were—" She swallowed, the memory tightening her chest. "You weren't breathing." He blinked slowly, almost as if hearing the truth for the first time. "And you tried anyway." "Of course I tried," Harper murmured. "What was I supposed to do, watch you?" She stopped herself. The word caught in her throat. The room fell into a hush, broken only by the faint beeping of the monitor. Elliot's gaze softened. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You didn't owe me anything. You didn't even know who I was." "That's not why a person helps somebody," she replied, the words slipping out raw and honest. "At least, not where I come from." Something flickered in Elliot's expression, like a truth he'd forgotten rising back to the surface. He nodded slightly. "Maybe I needed to be reminded of that." Harper exhaled, tension easing just an inch. She stepped closer to the bed, keeping a respectful distance. Sola moved to adjust a curtain, giving them both room. Harper glanced at him, grateful for the silent support. Then she looked at Elliot again, more carefully this time. "What do the doctors say?" she asked. "That I'm lucky," he said, "but lucky doesn't feel like the right word." Harper frowned. "Why not?" "Because luck doesn't have a voice, Chung," he answered. "Luck doesn't tell you to hold on. Luck doesn't tremble." His gaze met hers, steady and sincere. "You did." She looked away, overwhelmed. She wasn't used to being seen so directly. Not by men like him, not by anyone. Her heart thudded unevenly, and she found herself tracing the edge of her sleeve just to keep her hands busy. You don't have to thank me, she said softly. But I do. He lifted a weak hand slightly, as if wanting to reach toward her, but not quite daring. Harper, you saved my life. She shook her head quickly. I don't know if I did. The paramedics— You were the first one, he interrupted gently. That matters. Silence stretched between them, warm and fragile. For the first time since last night, Harper let herself feel the weight of what had happened, not as fear, not as dread, but as something strangely beautiful. She hadn't just acted on instinct. She had reached into the darkness with whatever light she had left, and somehow, impossibly, he remembered. A sudden knock shattered the moment. The door swung open. Damian Ward stepped inside with his usual tailored precision, his smile tight enough to cut glass. His eyes darted from Harper to Elliot, calculating, displeased. Well, Damian said, clapping his hands once as if interrupting a meeting. Isn't this touching? Elliot's jaw tensed. Damian. Damian strode forward, ignoring the tension. Mr. Ward, you need rest. And Miss— He glanced at Harper, his gaze sliding over her clothes, her hair, her skin. Miss Lane, is it? I'm sure you've had a long morning. Perhaps it's time we give my cousin some space. Sola stiffened beside the door. Harper felt her throat tighten. She'd met men like Damian before. Men who didn't need to say out loud that she didn't belong. Men who used looks the way others used weapons. Elliot's voice cut through the air. She stays. Damian blinked. Elliot, she stays, Elliot repeated, firmer this time. Something dark flashed behind Damian's polite mask, but he buried it quickly. Of course, if that's what you want. His smile returned, cold, pressed thin. I only worry for your recovery. Elliot didn't bother replying. Damian turned to Harper with faux graciousness. Well then, Miss Lane, thank you for whatever role you played. I'm sure you meant well. Harper felt the sting under his words. She clasped her hands, refusing to shrink. I did what anyone should have done. Damian said lightly. Not everyone agrees. The room went still. Something in Harper's chest tightened. Fear, anger, or old wounds resurfacing, she couldn't tell. But before she could speak, Elliot's voice cut through again. Damian, that's enough. Damian nodded as if unbothered. We'll talk later. He turned to leave. At the doorway, he paused just long enough for Harper to see the truth beneath the charm. He didn't want her here, and he didn't intend to let her stay in Elliot's life. When the door finally closed behind him, Harper exhaled shakily. Elliot watched her, his brow furrowed with concern. I'm sorry, he said. He can be— I've met his type, Harper murmured. They don't scare me as much as they used to. A hint of admiration lit Elliot's tired eyes. I believe that. But beneath the warmth of their exchange, something else lingered. An unspoken threat. A shift in the air that neither could name. Harper glanced toward the door Damian had gone through. She didn't know his full intentions yet, but she had the sinking feeling that her life had just stepped onto a path with no way back, and no way to predict what came next. By late afternoon, Harper was back in her neighborhood, her steps slow as she pushed her empty cart through the cracked sidewalks and littered gutters. The visit with Elliot had left her shaken in ways she hadn't expected. His gratitude had been real, gentle even. But Damian's eyes— those had cut through her like cold wire. People like Damian didn't say their true warnings out loud. They didn't have to. Their looks delivered the message clearly. You don't belong here. Stay away. When Harper reached her block, kids were skipping rope near a fire hydrant, music thumping from a nearby apartment window. Life went on the way it always did in South Chicago. Loud, messy, stubborn. But for Harper, something felt off. As if the shadows had grown longer, stretching behind her like they wanted to catch up. Miss Laverne was sitting at the kitchen table when Harper came in, sipping tea from her floral mug. Her gaze lifted, sharp and knowing. "How was he?" she asked. Harper took off her hoodie, letting the warmth of the room thaw the chill in her bones. "Alive, weak, kind," she hesitated, "and trapped between people who don't always mean him well." Miss Laverne nodded slowly. "Men with money often surrounded by folks who love the money more than the man." Harper sank into the chair across from her. "Grandma, his cousin was there. Damien Ward." She rubbed her palms together. "He didn't say anything wrong, not directly, but the way he looked at me, like I was a stain he'd scrub off the floor if he could." Miss Laverne clicked her tongue softly. "Baby, some people build their whole identity on looking down at others, but you don't shrink for them." "I'm not shrinking," Harper whispered. "I'm just scared." Miss Laverne reached across the table and held her granddaughter's hands. "Being scared don't make you weak. It makes you human." The tenderness made Harper's throat tighten. She squeezed back. But peace never stayed long. A knock rattled the front door, short, sharp, impatient. Harper and Miss Laverne exchanged worried glances. "Stay here," Harper whispered, standing. She opened the door just a crack. Damien Ward stood on the landing, wearing an immaculate gray coat that didn't fit the surroundings at all. The dim hallway light flickered above him, casting shadows across his perfectly composed face. Harper froze. "Miss Lane," he said, voice smooth as polished stone. "We need to talk." Her heart hammered. How did you find where I live?" "We're very thorough at WardTech," Damien replied, smiling in a way that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm sure you understand." Harper stepped outside, closing the door behind her to shield her grandmother. "Why are you here?" Damien adjusted his cufflinks casually. "My cousin is vulnerable, recovering. He's under immense pressure already. The last thing he needs is complication." "I'm not a complication," Harper said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I didn't ask for any of this." "Exactly," Damien said softly, leaning closer. "So let's make sure it ends that way." A cold sweep of fear slid down Harper's spine. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," Damien murmured, "that you did your part. You helped. Noble of you. But now it's time to fade back into your world, Miss Lane. Elliot does not need, nor can he afford, the distraction of a woman he barely knows, especially one who might attract attention." Harper stared at him. "Attention from who?" "Oh, reporters, investors, law enforcement if someone decides to twist the story." Damien shrugged lightly. "These situations get messy quickly." The implication stung deeper than any insult. "You think I'm trying to use him?" Harper whispered. "I think," Damien said softly, "that the safest thing for you, and for my cousin, is distance. Permanent distance." Her chest tightened painfully, the same way it had years ago when she'd been fired from a restaurant because the manager insisted she didn't fit the atmosphere. Different man, different clothes, same demeaning tone. "I'm not a threat to him," Harper said. "With respect," Damien replied, "that's not your decision to make." He reached into his coat and pulled out a white envelope. He held it out to her. Harper didn't take it. "What is that?" she asked, voice low. "A gesture of appreciation," Damien said, though the word appreciation sounded like something sour on his tongue. "A simple thank you for keeping your distance." Harper's stomach twisted. "You're paying me to disappear?" Damien's smile returned, thin, professional. "To avoid unnecessary complications for everyone involved." Harper felt heat rush to her face. Not embarrassment, but anger. Deep, bone-deep anger. I don't want your money, she said through clenched teeth. I helped him because he needed help, not because of who he is. Even more reason to take this, Damien insisted, stepping forward slightly. It allows you to go back to your life without interference. I said no. His expression darkened. Miss Lane, he said quietly, you're young, and your life is complicated. Jobs come and go, bills pile up. Your grandmother's health. Stop, she snapped, the word cracking through the hallway. Damien held up his hands in mock surrender. I'm only suggesting you make a smart choice. People like us, we live in very different worlds. Intersections between them rarely end well. Harper stood her ground. Tell your cousin I'm happy he's alive. But if you ever come to my door again with money or threats, I won't answer as politely. Damien controlled his irritation, though his jaw tightened. Very well. He turned to leave but paused at the staircase. One last piece of advice, he said without looking back. Stay away from Elliot Ward, for your sake and his. And with that, he descended the stairs, each step echoing like a warning. Harper stood frozen until the sound faded. She felt shaken, not because she feared him, but because she feared he had the power to make things very, very hard if he wanted to. Inside the apartment, Miss Laverne's voice floated softly. Everything okay, baby? Harper swallowed, blinking back the sting in her eyes. I'm fine, Grandma, she whispered. I'm just tired. But as she walked back inside, she knew tired wasn't the truth. She was angry. She was scared. And worst of all, she was already far more involved than she wanted to be. And somewhere across the city, Elliot Ward, awake, aching, and searching for the truth, had no idea that the woman he owed his life to had just been told to disappear. The night settled over Chicago with a heavy quietness, the kind that made the city lights seem farther away than usual. Elliot lay in his hospital bed staring at the ceiling, exhaustion carving deep shadows around his eyes. His body was weak, but his mind refused to rest. Every time he closed his eyes, the same image surfaced. The feeling of rain, the echo of a trembling voice, and a warmth on his forehead just before his heart found its rhythm again. He pressed the call button. A nurse stepped in, offering a polite smile. Everything okay, Mr. Ward? Elliot struggled to sit up straighter. Could you bring me the paramedic reports from last night? Everything recorded when they picked me up. The nurse hesitated. You'll need approval for that. Then get approval, he said, softer than the words sounded. Please. She nodded and disappeared. A few minutes later, Sola walked in holding a tablet under his arm. You rang? You find anything? Elliot asked. Sola lowered his voice. More than I expected, and less than you deserve. He handed over the tablet. Elliot scanned the notes. Heart stopped, resumed suddenly. Unknown cause. He swiped again. A grainy still frame popped up, a shadowed figure kneeling beside him, rain streaking across the ambulance lights. Harper. Her posture alone told a full story. Fear, determination, desperation, hope. She was really there, Elliot whispered. She wasn't a dream. No, Sola said. And I think she's in more trouble than she understands. Elliot's gaze lifted. Why? Sola hesitated before answering. Because before leaving earlier, Damien looked unsettled. And when Damien's unsettled, he doesn't ask questions. He eliminates variables. Elliot's pulse jumped painfully. Where is he now? Out, Sola replied. I couldn't get details, but if I had to guess, he exhaled slowly. He's handling the situation the way he always does, quietly. Elliot felt a chill crawl down his spine. Find Harper, he commanded. Now. But Harper Lane was already living the consequences of Damien's visit. Back in South Chicago, Harper sat at the small kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea she didn't remember brewing. Miss Laverne had gone to bed early, but not before kissing Harper's cheek and whispering, "You're stronger than the world thinks, baby." Harper didn't feel strong, not when her chest still burned with humiliation from Damien's words, not when fear shadowed every corner of her mind. She'd grown up knowing what lines she wasn't supposed to cross, and now she'd accidentally stepped over one so boldly, someone in a tailored suit came to press her back. A soft vibration pulled her from her thoughts. Her phone. Unknown number. She let it ring once, twice. She answered on the fourth. "Harper Lane?" a voice asked, deep and weary. Her breath caught. "Yes. Who's calling?" "This is Elliot Ward." She stood so fast her chair scraped against the floor. "How did you get my number?" "Sola tracked it down," Elliot said. "I hope that's not too intrusive. I wanted to call before anything else happened." "Anything else?" Harper repeated, her voice thin. There was a pause long enough for her heartbeat to fill the silence. "I think my cousin visited you," Elliot said gently. Harper shut her eyes. "He said things he shouldn't have." "He often does," Elliot admitted, bitterness tucked beneath his words. "Harper, I'm so sorry. He had no right to come to your home." Harper paced to the window, fingers trembling as she touched the curtains. "He told me to stay away, that I'd cause trouble, that people like me don't belong in your world." Another pause, sharper this time. Then Elliot said, with more strength than he'd managed since waking, "My world isn't worth much if it can't include someone who saved my life." Harper swallowed, emotion thickening her voice. "I didn't save you by myself." "Maybe not," he said. "But you're the reason I'm still here talking to you." Her knees weakened. She leaned against the table for support. "Harper," Elliot continued, "I want to see you again. Not because of what happened, but because I don't want Damien's fear or pride dictating who I'm allowed to be grateful to." She let out a shaky breath. "You really think he's afraid?" "I think he's afraid of anyone he can't control," Elliot answered. "And you're not someone he can control." Harper didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "I'm not even trying to be part of anything. I just helped because you needed help." "And I'm trying to say," Elliot replied softly, "that I don't want the person who helped me to be pushed away because of my family." Her heartbeat softened, steadied. "Let me come to you," he said. "Not tonight, but soon. When I'm cleared to move. Until then, can we just keep talking? I want to understand what happened. I want to understand you." No one had ever said those words to her with sincerity. She nodded, forgetting he couldn't see it. "Yeah, we can talk." They spoke for 20 minutes, about nothing important, yet everything important. Her fruit cart. His time growing up shadowed by expectations. The strange feeling of surviving something he shouldn't have. The strange feeling of being blamed for something she didn't do. It was the gentlest conversation Harper had had in years, but not everyone was interested in gentleness. Across town, in a dim office lit only by the city lights, Damien Ward stood before a wall of monitors displaying financial charts. His reflection glimmered faintly in the glass, hard, sharp, determined. He set down a whiskey glass and tapped his fingers against the desk. He had heard Elliot's phone call. He had listened to every word, and his jaw tightened with quiet fury. "This girl," he muttered. "This girl is going to ruin everything." He opened a locked drawer, pulled out a folder with Harper's picture clipped to the front, and said softly, "Time to make sure she stays out of the way." Meanwhile, Harper hung up the phone feeling a tiny spark inside her. Small, trembling, but undeniably real. Hope. Not for love, not for miracles, for dignity, for being seen. She didn't know that forces larger than her neighborhood, larger than her life, were already moving in the shadows. She didn't know that Elliot's world was about to collide with hers in ways neither could control. She only knew that for the first time in days, she could breathe without fear tightening her ribs. But that peace would not last long. Morning came gray and heavy over South Chicago, the kind that made the streets feel narrower and colder. Harper pushed her fruit cart down the familiar cracked sidewalk, wheels squeaking the same tired rhythm they always had. She tried to tell herself today would be normal, that she could tuck last night's conversation with Elliot into some quiet corner of her heart and keep living the life she knew. But whispers travel fast in places where hope is scarce. And before noon, someone had already found her. Two teenagers passed by, glancing at her cart, then at their phones. One nudged the other. "Yo, that's her. The girl who was with that rich dude." Harper froze. "What did you say?" They didn't answer, just kept walking, snickering under their breath. Her stomach tightened. She brushed it off, forcing her hands to keep slicing fruit, arranging oranges and apples like she always did. But more eyes followed her as the morning stretched on. Some curious, some cold, some suspicious. Miss Laverne called from the apartment window above, voice shaky. "Baby, you okay down there?" "Yeah," Harper lied. "Just a weird morning." It only grew weirder. Around lunchtime, a black sedan rolled slowly down the block, windows tinted so dark it reflected the world back like a polished mirror. It passed her once, then again, then parked at the corner. Harper's hands trembled around a paper cup. "Not again," she whispered. "Lord, please not today." This time, the door didn't open. No one stepped out. The car just sat there, idling, watching. She didn't need to see its driver to know it wasn't Elliot. And it wasn't anyone interested in buying fruit. It was someone gathering information. Someone waiting. When the car finally pulled away, Harper exhaled so sharply she had to grip the cart to steady herself. But the day still wasn't done with her. By mid-afternoon, a white news van rumbled to a stop beside the curb. A woman in a neat blazer stepped out, her hair perfectly styled, her smile sharp as a blade. "Harper Lane?" she called, already prepping a microphone. "No," Harper said quickly, tugging her hood lower. "No interviews." The reporter stepped closer. "We know you were present during Elliot Ward's medical emergency. Is it true you revived him? Are you involved with him? Do you have a comment?" Harper backed away, shaking her head. "I'm not involved with anyone. Please, I didn't do anything." Cameras clicked. A crowd gathered. Curiosity sharpened into judgment. "That's her?" someone said. "The street girl? She's probably after his money. Those people always want something." Those people. Harper felt the words like a cold slap. She didn't stop to defend herself. She didn't try to explain. She pushed her cart through the cluster of reporters and ran, down the block, around the corner, toward home. By the time she reached the apartment, her breath was shaky, her palms damp. Miss Laverne met her at the door, worry etched deep on her face. "What happened?" "People, reporters, I don't know," Harper stammered. "They think I did something wrong. They think I want something from that man." Miss Laverne pulled her inside and closed the door. "Sit down. You're shaking." But Harper couldn't sit. Her mind wouldn't stop racing. She had spent her entire life trying to stay invisible, trying not to be the black girl who attracted the wrong kind of attention, the wrong assumptions, the wrong accusations. And now, her face could be on TV. Her name could be trending. She didn't want this. She never asked for it. She pressed her hands to her head. "Grandma, I didn't ask for any of this. I didn't even know who he was. I just tried to help. Miss Laverne rested a gentle hand on her shoulder. And you did right. Don't let anyone make you doubt that. But the knock on the door shattered whatever comfort those words offered. 3 sharp knocks. Firm. Official. Harper felt her chest cave in. No, not again. Miss Laverne answered with a cautious, "Who is it?" "Chicago PD," a voice replied. Harper's knees nearly buckled. "I didn't do anything illegal," she whispered. Miss Laverne squeezed her arm. "We'll handle this." 2 officers stood outside, calm but not friendly. "Ms. Harper Lane?" the taller one asked. Harper stepped forward. "Yes. Is something wrong?" "We'd like to ask you a few questions regarding last night's emergency call involving Mr. Elliot Ward." Miss Laverne bristled. "She didn't do a thing wrong." "This is routine," the officer said. "We're verifying statements." Harper nodded weakly. "Okay. What do you need to know?" They questioned her, where she was standing, what she did, why she intervened. She answered honestly. She didn't think. She just acted. But when one officer asked, "Did Mr. Ward offer you compensation?" she realized what they were really verifying. They wanted to know if she was exploiting him, and it broke her heart. "No," she said quietly. "I didn't want anything from him." The officers exchanged a look, neither believing nor disbelieving, then left with a polite nod. When the door shut behind them, Harper sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. "Why is this happening?" she whispered. Before Miss Laverne could answer, headlights washed across the window. A moment later, footsteps hurried up the stairs, steady, determined, familiar. A knock followed, gentler this time. "Harper?" a warm voice called. "It's Elliot." Her head shot up. Miss Laverne's eyebrows rose. "Well, that man moves fast." Harper opened the door. There stood Elliot Ward, pale but standing, supported only by a cane. He looked exhausted, battered by the day, yet his eyes searched for her with an urgency that softened the room. "I heard what happened," he said. "Reporters, police, Damien." Harper folded her arms tightly around herself. "They think I'm some con artist trying to get close to you." Elliot shook his head. "Harper, I came here to say something very clearly." He stepped closer. "You didn't cause this storm. I did. And I won't let it swallow you." Her breath hitched as his voice lowered, steady and sincere. "I am going to help you get your truth back." Harper blinked against sudden tears, because for the first time since the night she knelt on that cold sidewalk, someone wasn't treating her like a threat. Someone was treating her like a human being, like she mattered. But before she could answer, a car door slammed outside, loud and violent. Harper flinched. Elliot turned toward the window, jaw tightening. "You're not safe here," he whispered. And for the first time, Harper believed him. The sound outside grew sharper, hurried steps on concrete, a car engine idling too close, voices low enough to feel dangerous. Elliot stepped forward, shielding Harper with a quiet instinct, though he could barely stand without his cane. Miss Laverne peeked through the curtains, her hand flying to her chest. "That's not the police," she murmured, "and that sure ain't anyone from this neighborhood." Elliot steadied himself, breathing through the ache in his ribs. "We need to leave. Now." Harper swallowed hard, torn between fear and disbelief. "Why is this happening to me? I didn't do anything." "I know," Elliot said gently, "but my cousin is desperate. He's losing control of the company, and he thinks you're the threat." "Me?" Harper whispered. "I don't even belong in your world." "That's the problem," Elliot replied. "You don't play by its rules, and Damien hates what he can't predict." Before Harper could respond, a loud knock rattled the door. Not the kind for greeting, the kind meant to intimidate. Miss Laverne stepped back quickly. You two go. Through the back stairs. I'll stall them. Harper grabbed her hand. No, Grandma, I'm not leaving you. Yes, you are, Miss Laverne insisted. I've lived long enough to know trouble when it knocks. You go with the man who's trying to help you. Elliot touched Harper's arm. We'll come back for her. But right now, Damien's people need to see this place empty. His voice carried no hesitation, only urgency. Harper nodded, forcing her shaking legs to move. They slipped through the tiny kitchen, out the back door, down the narrow iron staircase that clung to the building's side. The metal groaned under their steps. Cold wind bit into their faces. Elliot limped, teeth clenched. Every movement cost him. But he didn't stop. My driver is 2 blocks over. We'll get to WardTech headquarters. Security there will hold. Headquarters? Harper echoed. Elliot, I can't walk into a skyscraper full of executives. I still smell like oranges and city dust. You walked into my death, he said softly. You can walk into my life. Harper felt something tighten in her throat. She didn't know whether it was fear or hope. They reached the alley just as a black SUV rounded the block. Get in, Sola whispered, jumping out and holding the back door open. Harper climbed in first, Elliot following with a sharp wince. The SUV peeled away as the men outside her apartment finally forced their way in, finding nothing but an empty living room and a fiercely protective grandmother. Harper pressed her forehead against the window as the neighborhood blurred past. This isn't my world, she murmured. I don't know how to survive something like this. You've already survived worse than Damien, Sola said from the front. You survived poverty, prejudice, and a life that tried to shrink you. Men like him? They fall apart when someone stands up to them. Harper didn't answer, but her eyes flickered with something not quite courage but close to it. When they reached WardTech Tower, Elliot was escorted inside by 2 security guards who looked stunned to see him upright. Within minutes, the news hit every floor. The CEO had returned. The board demanded answers, and Damien was already in the executive conference room, preparing to cement his power before anyone realized Elliot was alive and lucid. Sola guided Harper into a quiet hallway. Stay right here. Don't go in unless Elliot tells you to. Harper hugged herself tightly. I don't understand why I have to be part of this. Sola's voice softened. Because you're the truth he needs in that room. Through the frosted glass, Harper saw silhouettes gathering, men in tailored suits, women in crisp blazers, assistants sliding digital screens into place. The tension felt electric, humming through the walls. Then Elliot appeared, leaning heavily on his cane but sharp-eyed, sharply dressed, sharp in spirit. The room fell silent as he entered. Thank you all for coming, he said, voice steady and cold. Damien rose from the head of the table, face a perfect mask. Cousin, you should be resting. Your recovery isn't your concern, Elliot interrupted. A murmur rippled across the table. Damien attempted a thin smile. I've held the company together in your absence. These people deserve stability. What they deserve, Elliot said, tapping the tablet in front of him, is honesty. Screens around the room flickered to life. Financial reports, altered documents, unauthorized transfers, Damien's fingerprints in every corner. The board gasped. Damien's composure cracked. You don't know what you're looking at, Damien snapped. These are temporary adjustments, meant to stabilize the company after your collapse. Elliot stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough that everyone leaned in. Damien, you planned for me not to wake up. And when I did, you panicked. One board member cleared his throat. Mr. Ward, is this true? Damien's jaw flexed. He's being manipulated. Elliot straightened. By whom? Damien gestured sharply toward the door. toward Harper's blurry silhouette. By that girl, that street vendor. She got to him. She's been after his money since the moment she watched him. Harper flinched as if struck. Elliot didn't even turn to look at her. His voice cut through the room. She saved my life. Silence fell like a stone. No one else stepped in, Elliot continued. Not my security, not the crowd, not the city. Only her. While you, he pointed at Damien, you were too busy preparing your takeover. Damien's face flushed. She's a nobody. She's the reason you still have a CEO to betray, Elliot replied. A beat of stunned quiet. Then Elliot looked at the board. I'm filing formal charges. Fraud, mismanagement, attempted usurpation of corporate authority. 2 security officers entered at his signal. Damien backed away, panic flashing. You can't do this. You did it to yourself, Elliot said. As they escorted him out, Damien twisted his head, eyes locking on Harper through the glass. This isn't over, he hissed. Harper stepped back, heart hammering. The conference room doors closed. Damien was gone, but the fear he left inside her remained sharp and trembling. Elliot emerged minutes later, worn but victorious. Harper, he said softly, you're safe now. But Harper shook her head, because she didn't feel safe. Not yet. Not when the world still saw her as someone reaching above her station. Not when one man's downfall could still become her burden. Not when tomorrow's headlines would twist her into something she wasn't. Her voice wavered. Elliot, what happens now? He took a breath, a long, steady breath. Now, he said, we begin to make things right. But the truth was, the storm hadn't passed. It had simply shifted, and the next wave was already on its way. By the time Elliot and Harper stepped out of the towering WardTech building, dusk had settled over Chicago like a soft bruise. The sky glowed violet, the last streaks of daylight fading behind the skyline as streetlights blinked awake one by one. Harper hugged her coat around herself, still shaken by everything that had unfolded. She wasn't meant for sleek conference rooms or glass elevators. She didn't speak the language of board members or financial auditors. She was a girl who sold fruit on a corner, who counted quarters carefully, who lived in a world where people rarely asked for her opinion, let alone her presence. Now she was at the center of a corporate coup. Elliot kept a respectful distance beside her. He didn't try to touch her or guide her. He simply walked near enough that she felt supported in a way she couldn't yet explain. You okay? He asked quietly. Harper let out a slow breath. I don't know. Everything in there felt too big for me. Too loud. Too dangerous. You held your ground, Elliot said, even without saying a word. She gave a small, sad laugh. Because I didn't have a choice. No, he corrected gently. Because you chose to keep moving, even when you were scared. They reached Sola's car, parked beneath an old elm tree that swayed with the evening breeze. But instead of opening the door, Harper turned to Elliot. I need to go home, she whispered. Elliot's expression shifted, concern rising like a tide. Damien's people were at your building. There's no guarantee they've cleared out. You should stay somewhere protected tonight. I don't want protection. Her voice cracked. I want my life back. I want quiet. I want my grandma safe. I want normal. Elliot nodded slowly, understanding the pieces of her heart she wasn't saying out loud. Then I'll take you home, he said softly. And I'll help however you'll let me. Harper hesitated. She didn't like accepting help, especially from a man whose last name could open doors she'd never even be allowed to knock on. But tonight wasn't about pride. Tonight was about making sure Miss Laverne was safe. She nodded. The drive back to South Chicago felt longer than usual. The city seemed to shift between flashing neon signs and dim corners where secrets hid behind dumpsters. Harper watched the streets blur by, her streets, her city, and wondered how everything could look the same when she felt so profoundly changed. When they reached her apartment, Harper's heart squeezed painfully. The front door to the building was cracked open, hanging slightly off its hinge. A chill rippled down her spine. "Oh God," she whispered. Sola pulled over rapidly. Elliot leaned forward. "Stay here," he said. "No," Harper insisted, though her voice shook. "She's my family. I'm not hiding in the car while you go in." Elliot didn't argue. He simply nodded and followed her. Inside, the hallway lights flickered faintly. A grocery bag lay overturned near the stairs. Miss Laverne's favorite brand of cornbread mix scattered across the floor. Harper rushed forward, calling out, "Grandma! Grandma!" A small voice answered from farther down the hall. "Harper, baby! We're in here!" Harper sprinted toward the apartment, pushing through the doorway with trembling hands. Miss Laverne sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, frail but unharmed. A neighbor hovered near her, patting her back. "Grandma!" Harper knelt beside her. "Are you okay? Did they hurt you?" "No, no." Miss Laverne stroked Harper's cheek. "They didn't touch me. They just scared me." Elliot entered more slowly, relief flooding his face. "Thank God." The neighbor spoke up. "Two men came by earlier. Suits, hard faces, asking questions about you. When you weren't home, they left." Harper sank onto the floor, burying her face in her hands. "I never wanted any of this," she whispered. Miss Laverne reached for her. "Come here, child." Harper leaned into her grandmother's embrace, letting the familiar warmth settle her shaking heart. Then Miss Laverne looked up at Elliot, eyes sharp despite her frailness. "You brought this to her doorstep, didn't you?" Elliot didn't defend himself. He simply lowered his gaze. "Yes, ma'am, I did." Miss Laverne studied him for several long seconds before saying, "What are you going to do to make it right?" Elliot straightened, a quiet resolve forming in his eyes. "Everything I can, starting tonight." He moved through the small apartment, gently inspecting the broken hinge on the door, the cracked window latch, the old wiring near the light switch. Then he knelt and replaced the hinge himself, with his own hands, not with a call to a contractor. He tightened the screws with a pocket tool, wiped dust from the frame, and tested the swing. Harper watched him silently. She wasn't used to men in suits doing anything for free, especially not physical work. When he was done, Elliot stood and exhaled. "I can have a professional come tomorrow to reinforce the locks, and I'll move your grandmother to a better clinic first thing in the morning. But tonight? Tonight she's safe." Miss Laverne smiled faintly. "You're a good man, son." Elliot looked surprised by the compliment, almost boyish in his gratitude. "I'm trying," he said softly. When the neighbor left and Miss Laverne drifted to sleep, Harper and Elliot stepped quietly into the hallway. "You didn't have to fix the door yourself," she said. "I needed to," he replied. "After everything she's been through, the least I can do is hold something together." Harper crossed her arms, not defensive, just overwhelmed. "I don't know how to let someone help me." Elliot leaned against the wall, resting on his cane. "Then we'll figure it out slowly, one step at a time." She looked up at him. In the dim hallway light, he seemed far less like a billionaire, and far more like a man trying to rebuild something broken. Not just in his company, but in himself. A small envelope protruding from his inner coat pocket caught her eye. "What's that?" she asked. Elliot hesitated. "A letter. From my attorney. For you." Her brows knit. "For me? Why?" He didn't answer. Instead, he held it out carefully, like something fragile. "Open it when you're ready," he said. "It's nothing bad, but it's something I hope will help start making things right." Harper didn't reach for it. Not yet. The day had been too much, too fast, too heavy. She just stared at the envelope, feeling its presence like a quiet spark that could either warm her or burn her. "I'll read it tomorrow," she whispered. "Tomorrow is perfect," Elliot replied. They stood there a moment longer, wrapped in a fragile peace that felt like the first breath after a long-held fear. Then Harper quietly closed the door, and Elliot walked away into the night, knowing the next chapter of their lives would demand more truth, more courage, and more heart than either of them expected. Morning rose slow and tender over South Chicago, sunlight slipping through the thin curtains of the apartment, like a gentle reminder that not every day arrived carrying darkness. Harper woke early, her eyes drifting to the small envelope Elliot had left on the kitchen table. It sat there untouched, quiet, patient, almost glowing in the soft light. Miss Laverne shuffled into the room with her robe wrapped tightly around her shoulders. "You gonna open that letter?" she said, "or let it grow old waiting?" Harper exhaled a long breath. I don't want it to be something that changes everything again." "Baby," Miss Laverne murmured, touching her cheek, "everything already changed. Now you just get to choose which direction it goes." Harper nodded slowly, finally picking up the envelope. Her fingers slid under the seal, peeling it back with a trembling care. She unfolded the pages inside. Thick paper, expensive ink, her name typed neatly at the top. It wasn't a lawsuit. It wasn't a contract. It wasn't a bill. It was a foundation charter, the Harper Lane Fund for street vendors and low-wage workers. Her breath caught. A handwritten note slipped out from the bottom. "Harper, this is not repayment. This is recognition. You showed the world what humanity should look like. I want that light to reach others who live the same struggle you do. You don't owe me anything, but I would be honored if you'd serve as our honorary advisor, shaping every decision with your experience." Elliot Harper pressed a hand to her mouth, shoulders trembling. Oh my God." Miss Laverne smiled through misty eyes. "Well, look at that. The world finally saw what I've seen your whole life." Harper wiped a tear, laughing shakily. "Grandma, I'm just a girl with a fruit cart." "And now," Miss Laverne replied, tapping the letter gently, "you're a girl who helped begin something bigger." Later that afternoon, Elliot sent a car to bring Harper and Miss Laverne downtown. Harper almost refused. She didn't want flashy entrances or special treatment, but Miss Laverne insisted her joints wouldn't survive 2 bus transfers. WardTech headquarters felt different today. Not sharp, not hostile, almost hopeful. Employees gathered in whispers as Harper walked through the glass doors, her small steps echoing across polished floors. A receptionist smiled. "You must be Ms. Lane. Mr. Ward is expecting you." Harper nodded shyly. "Yes, ma'am." The elevator ride was long and strangely quiet. When the doors opened on the top floor, sunlight flooded the hallway from floor-to-ceiling windows. Chicago stretched out in every direction, vast, electric, alive. Elliot stood near the end of the hallway, leaning on his cane, watching the city as if seeing it for the first time. He turned when he heard Harper's footsteps. "Harper," he said softly. "Thank you for coming." Harper held up the letter. I don't understand why you chose me." Elliot approached, his expression gentle. "Because I've spent years surrounded by people with power, and yet none of them saved me. None of them knelt in the rain. None of them acted without asking what they'd get in return." He took a breath. "You reminded me what real leadership should look like." Her voice wavered. "I don't know anything about foundations or boards or whatever this is." That's why I want you, Elliot said. We don't need another executive in a suit telling people what they should need. We need someone who actually lived it. Harper's eyes glistened in the sunlight. Before she could respond, a staff member approached and opened the doors to a large conference room. Inside, cameras were set up. Not media cameras, but internal documentation. A small crowd gathered, including community leaders, street vendors, and WardTech employees. At the center stood a newly printed banner. The Harper Lane Fund, honoring everyday heroes. Harper gasped, nearly stepping back. I didn't want a spotlight, she whispered. You're not being spotlighted as charity, Elliot said. You're being honored as truth. He guided her forward, not pulling, not pushing, simply walking beside her. When they reached the podium, Elliot raised a hand for quiet. Everyone, he began, voice rich and steady, we are here today because one woman reminded all of us, that every life deserves dignity. He gestured toward Harper. In a world where people often walk past suffering, where fear and judgment drown out compassion, Harper Lane stepped forward. She saved a stranger without knowing his name, his title, or his worth, and by doing that, she revealed her own. The room was silent, hanging on every word. She didn't save a billionaire, Elliot said gently. She saved a man. And today, I want to acknowledge her humanity, not with medals or money, but with a promise. He unfolded the foundation documents. This fund will provide healthcare access, legal protection, and emergency aid to street vendors and low-income workers across Chicago. And Harper Lane, whose lived experience gives her a wisdom I could never earn, will guide it. Applause swelled through the room, warm and sincere. Harper felt heat bloom in her chest. Not embarrassment, but something deeper, something healing. Elliot leaned toward her. Would you like to say anything? Harper stepped to the microphone, hands trembling lightly. I'm not good with speeches, she said, earning a few soft laughs. I sell fruit. I work hard. I've been ignored. I've been talked down to. I've been scared. But that night, when I saw someone needed help, I just acted. She swallowed. I didn't expect anything to come of it. But maybe that's the point. Maybe kindness doesn't need to be big to make a difference. Maybe it just needs to be real. A hush fell over the crowd, quiet admiration. And if this fund can help people like me feel seen, feel safe, feel human, then I'm honored to be part of it. Another wave of applause filled the room. When Harper stepped away from the podium, Elliot met her with a soft, grateful smile. You did beautifully. She blushed. I was shaking. I noticed, he teased gently. It made it better. Miss Laverne dabbed her eyes with a tissue. You two better feed me something good, after all this crying you made me do. Everyone laughed. Elliot turned to Harper, lowering his voice. You know, what you did changed more than my heartbeat that night. It changed the course of this company. It changed me. Harper met his gaze, steady, warm, unguarded. And what you're doing now, it's changing lives too. They stood there. No grand declarations, no dramatic gestures. Just two people whose worlds collided in the rain and rebuilt something brighter from the pieces. Outside the conference room, sunlight streamed across the marble floors, casting long, golden paths toward the city below. A city that would remember Harper Lane, not as a girl from a broken neighborhood, not as someone who stumbled into a billionaire's story, but as someone who chose kindness when it mattered most and showed Chicago what humanity could look like. And as the applause echoed and the foundation's first signatures were inked, one truth settled over them all like a blessing. When kindness asks for nothing, the world finds its own way to give back. If this story touched your heart, drop a simple 1 in the comments so we know you're here with us. And if you want more stories of courage, hope, and everyday heroes, make sure to subscribe and stay close. The next chapter is already on its way.